And then at the end, when he was getting it to go and everyone else was leaving, I just said, Charlie, could we have a quick chat? I've got an idea to run by you. He went, yeah, sure. So we just sat in this room and said, look, what's your thoughts on, doing a new edition of Call of Cthulhu? It's been, over 10 years or more since 6th edition came out. And is that something you're even contemplating? He went, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Could you do it? And that was the conversation.
That's
and
what he said.
Yeah, because I guess he knew us. He knew we had the passion to do it. And I think maybe we were just lucky that we were the first people to ask him. I don't know. Maybe if it'd been somebody else, they'd
Isn't that something? For the past 3+ decades, there's been 2 games that have dominated the RPG world. Of course, Dungeons & Dragons and Call of Cthulhu. It's October, time to think spooky things. So not only are we going to be premiering Call of Cthulhu on our Twitch channel, but I got a chance to sit down with Mike Mason, the person in charge of Call of Cthulhu over at Chaosium, one of the people that brought us the most recent 7th edition. You might be surprised how he got the gig. Make sure you stick around to the end. We cover some thoughts on how to run a Call of Cthulhu game. Also, make sure you scroll down to the show notes. This is the 40th anniversary of Call of Cthulhu, and I've got links to some really neat things that Chaosium is doing to celebrate it. Anyway, I'd like you to sit back, don't get too comfortable, and enjoy my time with Mike Mason.
Third Floor Wars delivers interviews, insights, and discussions about everything hitting the tabletop. Rulebooks, plastic models, dice, and cards in hand. Let the gaming begin. Tabletop games let you escape and unleash grand battles and regale epic tales of adventure with your friends. If you love gaming and learning from players, designers, experts, and creators, you are in the right place. Pull up a chair. Craig and Ray welcome you to the Third Floor and the Tabletop Talk Podcast.
Howdy friends, Craig here. Today we're talking to Mike Mason, creative director, editor, and lead writer for Call of Cthulhu at Chaosium. Mike is the award-winning co-writer of several great RPG books, including Call of Cthulhu 7th Edition Keeper's Rulebook and Pulp Cthulhu, and that's just to name a few. So, Mike, welcome to the Third Floor.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm looking forward to it.
So, as we're going to see, and for listeners, for the few people that are listening that may not be aware of it, Mike's geek cred is pretty impressive. And we're going to kind of get into all of that. But before we do, at some point, Mike, you did not realize you could roll dice, play with miniatures, grab a piece of paper and pretend to be somebody else. And then all of a sudden, someone introduced it to you, or you were exposed to it. Do you mind going back to that and give me your kind of gaming origin story?
Sure. Pre-RPG, this in terms of I always loved board games, but obviously when I was growing up, board games meant Monopoly and Cluedo. The best, it's not really a board game, but the best game I ever had pre-RPG was Jaws, the game, where you had a big plastic shark and its jaws was spring-loaded, and you filled the mouth up, open mouth, with lots of kind of plastic junk like wheels and anchors and things, and you had a hook, and you took turns to hook something out of the mouth of the shark. And of course, when the weight got too low, the shark would snap its jaws shut, and you would lose. You'd be the losing player. I got that for a Christmas present many years ago, and that as a side note started my lifelong obsession with Jaws, the film. But that's a completely different story. However, to get to the point. RPG. So I knew nothing about role-playing games, and I had a friend at school. I'm trying to think of how old I would be. This would probably be sometime around 1980, 79, 80. It's very foggy and misty and going back 40 years. He had a birthday party and had invited me to his birthday party, and that's all I knew. And I turned up expecting it to be like every other kind of, 10, 11-year-old, 12 birthday party. And it wasn't. It was basically 6 people, including his brother and his brother's mate, who were older than us, sat around the kitchen table with I didn't know what it was. Basically, they had these really cool miniatures of like skeletons and wizards and some kind of cardboard floor pans. And I was told we were going to play this game called Dungeons and Dragons. And that's I knew nothing about it. And then for the next like 2 or 3 hours, we well, me and him fumbled our way through being told, no, roll that dice, roll high. And I just, all I seem to remember, I can only remember that we kept meeting loads of skeletons because I think that was really the only miniatures they had. And it was just great fun. And we were really into it. And of course, it was his brother's friend who owned the miniatures and stuff. And he had to go home. And we all wanted to carry on playing. So then there was a big argument about, well, can you not just leave your miniatures and we can carry on playing? Because obviously it never entered our heads that you could play without miniatures. Obviously, you need the miniatures to play. And so we managed to twist his arm and he left the miniatures with us so we could play for another hour before we all went home. And that was cool. That was the first thing I ever played. And I didn't really understand what was going on, but I just knew I loved it. And I loved the miniatures. The miniatures were like 50% of my enjoyment was looking at the miniatures, how cool they were. And the other 50% was just the craziness of, I'm a wizard, I cast magic, and, these skeletons that don't seem to die keep coming back. And that was that, really. And very fortuitous, my history teacher, who was a great history teacher called Phil Simmons, was a gamer. But he was an old school, he was a war gamer, and he actually started a games club pretty much around about that same time. So nice. And so what he would do, I don't know, it was literally kind of like, here's the first ones are free. He would go off he would say, I'm going off to London this weekend. And then when he would turn up at the games club the following, Tuesday or Wednesday, he'd have all these, really early Citadel miniatures he'd bought in their packets. Going like, I bought all these. These are all spares I don't want. I'm selling them. So he would like an ogre, 60p. And and we would just gather around and almost like auctioning. I mean, we weren't auctioning, but it was like, no, I really want the ogre. And no, you've already bought one. He has to have one.
Oh, that's
being
funny.
Very teachery. And so there was a real, it was a great little after school club there was kind of historical kind of simple war games going on, lots of D&D, and very occasionally one of the older guys would wander in with, I bought this thing called Traveller, let's play this. And I mean, that's probably, and maybe somebody tried RuneQuest, I don't know, but I mean, it was mainly Keep on the Borderlands and Palace of the Silver Princess and all of that kind of thing. And that's really, and that's how I learned, and that's how I understood this was a bigger hobby than just, somebody's kitchen table, and there were dedicated shops to this you could, go to, and that was my start.
Wow. So you're young teens at that point. As you're finishing secondary school, did your interest maintain that whole time? As you went to university, did it maintain, or did you ever kind of lose interest?
No, well, at school, what happened? I changed schools. I actually moved away. The family moved away. We moved to a new area. The first day in my new school, the kind of the students, my form tutor, kind of put me in. You look after him and show him the ropes, kind of thing. He within about 5 minutes of talking, he got on to talk about D&D. And I play D&D. And suddenly, we were now best friends forever, and we instant D&D group sorted. So I had no, and then that led us to start up a role playing club in the school, and this new school. So all through my school into what we would call the sixth form high school at your side, I was role playing every week. I was in fact running the role playing club by then, and encouraging new people to play. Then I went to university and studied theatre and drama. And that's when I stopped, because it was a bit weird acting all day and then role playing acting at night. And I didn't have the headspace for all that acting. I needed, some time off. So I didn't really do any role play over the 3 years of university, and just focused on drama, acting, directing, and drinking beer mainly. And then, but once I left university and I started work, it was really weird. I would still pop into the game shop to just keep an eye, because I still liked it, but I just wasn't really playing. And I had this penny drop when I was working. I suddenly like, for the first time in my life, I have disposable income. I can buy role-playing games. Wow! So I did. I then went and bought them, and then rang up all my old school friends and said, "Right, let's get playing." And so we just continued where we left off, playing a bit of D&D. But to be honest, by then, we'd already been playing Call of Cthulhu for, I don't know, where are we now? Nearly 10 years.
Wow.
And, and so it was very natural. And it was all our favorite games. So it was very natural. Although we kind of kicked off again with a bit of D&D, we very quickly just went back to playing Call of Cthulhu and picking up the new material that had come out over the last few years and giving that a go, because both myself and another friend of mine in that group, Dave, we both would GM basically. So we'd just take turns. Dave would buy the Spawn of Azathos box set, so he'd run that. I'd buy whatever it is, I don't know, Mansions of Madness, and I'd done that kind of thing. We just take turns, and we just love Call of Cthulhu. So we did play other things. We'd have a break and we'd play whatever Games Workshop had released that month on license, or put out, like Car Wars or Judge Dredd, the role-playing game, or that kind of thing. But we'd always go back to Cthulhu. That was our main game in that sense.
So I'd be interested, Mike, obviously, we know how this story leads to where you are now, right? Which colors it a little bit. But looking back, as adult Mike looks back to young adult Mike, and your draw to how you kept gravitating back to Call of Cthulhu, do you have a sense what it was back then that made you guys decide that was your favorite game and what drew you back to it consistently?
I think we were all tired of D&D. I think we got to a point where we enjoyed D&D, but I know the group of people I hung around with, we really liked fiction and films, and we'd swap books and we'd go see films, and it was the stories. It was the story, and D&D is never particular. I mean, I know you can create stories in D&D, but it's not been built on stories. It's a dynamic kind of action-based game that's about a sequence of events. It's not a story in the same way. It's not got a plot in the same way that the Call of Cthulhu scenario did or has. And we loved the plotting, and we loved the whole. For us, it wasn't just the game; it was everything that went with it. It was discovering not only Lovecraft's writing, but all of the Lovecraft circle. So we would go out together to book fairs, and we would track down secondhand bookshops in other towns and get on a train and spend a day haunting secondhand bookshops to try and dig out, hard to find at that time, books by Clark Ashton Smith and Robert Bloch and Robert E. Howard and anyone else, anything to slightly kind of touch on the mythos. We were kind of book collectors as well. So it was the whole kind of kit and caboodle that really kind of fired us up. And for me personally, I mean, before I even gamed, I was into horror books and sci-fi. I had a secondhand bookshop literally around the corner from where I lived as a fairly young child. And I would spend all my time in the secondhand bookshop. And so I to this day, I still hit myself going like, why didn't I buy it? Because I now know what the books I was looking at. I only remember their covers. But now I know that, yes, they had nearly enough everything ever written by Clark Ashton Smith there that I looked and was like, oh, they're really cool covers, but I didn't know what they were. So I ended up buying Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov and people that I kind of knew or were like authors I had heard. And so I kicked myself to say that I had access to all of these books and never bought them. But so I was into that. And I loved Hammer films, horror films, and it was just a natural, D&D was great. It was kind of, oh, that's all fun. And then when I found Call of Cthulhu, it was like, this is what I've been looking for. This is, I've always been into, horror fiction and all that kind of stuff. And as a teenager buying in the UK, there was a serialized part work called The Unexplained, which is all about, real life ghost stories and mysteries, and I bought all of those. And it was just the amalgamation of that into, this is all about all the things I like. So that's kind of how it kind of cemented for me, I guess.
That's fantastic. So guys, the Insider Insight series is my opportunity to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and methods for crafting their creations. And we're going to do that with Mike today. So we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back. We're going to talk about pre-Chaosium Mike. Mike did a lot before he came to Chaosium, and I want to talk and learn about that. We'll be right back. That was fantastic, Mike. Thank you.
No worries.
All right. So I listed a couple things on here, Mike. That doesn't mean we have to talk about everyone. It doesn't mean that if it's not listed there, I don't want to talk about it. But essentially, I'd like to get an idea of when you started producing, right? Started making stuff for games, and then maybe we'll try to finish up with you coming on to Chaosium before we move on to what you've done there. Does that work?
Yeah, sure.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
So now that we have an understanding, Mike, of, your love and passion for role-playing games and for tabletop gaming, I'd be curious from a career path, right? So you finished your 3 years at university. Did you go out and get a quote-unquote real job at that point? What happens next?
Yeah, I graduated from university into one of the UK's ever popular kind of economic declines where there wasn't a lot of work. The Conservative Tory government was still in power, and there wasn't a lot of work going for the likes of me with a drama degree. So I very quickly learned about, adapting my skill set to things that would be useful in business, which at the end of the day was about promotions and communication and project management, which was all things you learn in theatre, although you don't call them that in theatre. So I got a job working in an adult training agency, effectively working in their marketing department to support young people going into training, basically post education. So that was my kind of day job, and I worked in that kind of education / training sphere, for different companies over the course of my career, really, and normally in either sort of which has always been a hybrid of marketing and project management. I'm one of those people. I tend to get bits of jobs added to mine as I go. It's one of the things of being vaguely competent at some things. So of course, as part of that, I did a lot of copywriting. I also looked after PR for a number of companies. So, I was writing press releases and direct marketing and all sorts of things like that, and working with designers, working with freelance designers all the time on various campaigns and projects, which is all kind of, as you know what I'm going to say, which is all great foundational work for understanding how to publish a book or do that kind of thing. So that was all happening in my spare time. I was just gaming. And then two things happened. I decided I was going to a lot of UK conventions and I was running Call of Cthulhu games. And I met a few other people that were running Call of Cthulhu games, and I liked what they were doing. And I was always being asked by the people that ran the various conventions, could you run more Cthulhu? Could you run more Cthulhu? And I was like, well, I can't, because I can only run so many. There's only one of me. And I had the brainwave was if I could get a bunch of people together who were kind of good Call of Cthulhu, GMs, and got us together, then we could go in mass to a show and we could run loads of Cthulhu and do what, we were being asked to do. So I had a chat with a few people, and I ended up kind of forming something called the Cult of Keepers, which was literally that. It was a bunch of Call of Cthulhu keepers who wrote convention scenarios. We shared them amongst ourselves, and then we all ran them at different shows around the UK and some in Europe as well. So that happened.
How big did that group get, Mike?
It wasn't massive. It was, I think, I'm trying to remember now. I think maybe 8. I mean, at times there were 8 or 10.
Okay, so a decent sized group.
So sometimes when we had back in the day, we used to have UK Gen Con, and obviously that was the biggest show in the UK at the time. So I would actually get more people in for that one on a kind of a one-off basis. So they would only come to that show. So I kind of recruit them for that. So sometimes it would be bigger than 10, but normally around that kind of 8 to 10 size was the kind of the hardcore of the group. So that was happening on one side.
Yeah, I'd be curious. So, in a lot of ways, being a GM can be a very isolated process, right? Where you're kind of on your own. Now, a lot's changed since the internet came, and it's not quite the same anymore. But back then, you'd be kind of doing your thing. And I'd be curious, now that you're getting these people together, all of you run Call of Cthulhu and you're grouped together, and it sounds somewhat handpicked by you because of the quality of the game they run. How much learning was happening there for you? Were you picking up ideas and things? I mean, did it end up being a collaborative growth as a group?
Yeah, it's at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. I did handpick the kind of people based on my experience of watching them run games at convention, also feedback to me from people I knew who had played in their games, that they had had a good game. And initially what would happen is I would just say, well, you write scenarios, send them in, I will read them. And if I think they're up to it, then I'll add them into the mix of scenarios available this year. So a lot of people, one of the people was Paul Fricker, who co-wrote Call of Cthulhu with me. So Paul, I met Paul through this,
No kidding.
And Paul will tell you, if you ever end up chatting to him as well, he will tell you that, he was very conscious of wanting to do his best work so he could get into the Cult of Keepers and have his scenarios, so people kind of wanted to, to kind of show off in a way. And as we got more experience and we worked together more and we understood the different kind of styles of GMing, because that's one of the attractions with the group, with that you have different people running things, and you could kind of understand what kind of game you would get from the different people in the group. We would get together once or twice a year and we would share ideas and we would work on scenarios collaboratively. Somebody would say, I've got this scenario idea, I think it's really cool, but I don't know where it's going, or I can't think what to do with it. And we would just kind of freeform it. We'd kind of not really play it. We'd kind of play it, verbally. We just talk it through, throw in ideas. So the person writing it could go, I've got some ideas now, I can see. And they would then go away and, write it themselves. But so there was a kind of collaborative side to it as well, which was very amazing. Useful.
And did you collect these, and are they hiding somewhere now? Or, it sounds like an amazing collection was being put together by this group.
Yeah, there's a bunch of scenarios. Which is kind of like which actually leads into the next bit, really, which is I started a fanzine called The Whisperer for Call of Cthulhu. Really, initially the intention was to put these scenarios in the fanzine, but things never quite work out how you imagine them, and it ended up being lots of other things that went in the fanzine, and these scenarios didn't end up going in the fanzine. Occasionally, we would at UK conventions kind of put some together and kind of do some kind of photocopy booklets and just sell them at cost to just literally a handful. And so there's a handful of those knocking around, probably fairly rare, I imagine. And they kind of got put on the side. And so, but some of them did end up in publication.
Wow.
In fact, Cubicle 7's very first Call of Cthulhu book, which is called Cthulhu Britannica, is a bunch of scenarios that I basically edited together in a book for them, which are all scenarios from the Cult of Keepers, more or less. I just kind of picked some of the most bizarre ones that would be kind of cool. And so they are, so some of them, a small proportion are available in that format. But by then I'd kind of started The Whisperer, and that ran from about 1999 to around the early 2000s, so 2003, I think. It's only 5 issues, like one issue a year, really, because I just couldn't fit any more in. But that was just a fanzine devoted to Call of Cthulhu. Mainly, the main reason I did that was in the UK we had Dagon fanzine that was fantastic and had been running throughout the kind of late 80s, early 90s, and then that has ceased. And in the US, there had been The Unspeakable Oath, and that kind of had gone on a hiatus as well. So there was no kind of fan publications for Call of Cthulhu at that time. And I did sit around waiting for someone to do that. And of course, nobody did. So I kind of went, well, I'll have to do it then. And so I kind of did this, small run little fanzine of scenarios and articles. I mean, I look back now in terms of some of the people that contributed, that have gone on to do stuff themselves, as, Brian Sammons, who's a well-known Call of Cthulhu author, Jeff Moller, Torrin Atkinson, lead singer of the Darkest Hillside Thickets and artist, Dave Allstott, who is one of the, creative, geniuses behind SLA Industries, Paul Carrick, the artist, Adam Crossingham, who went on to form the Six of Stone Press for doing Cthulhu licensed product. So and a bunch of other people. So it's kind of
talent.
Like so it was great to and of course doing that was kind of my kind of learning exercise in terms of how to put gaming material together and edit gaming material, and very early kind of idea of how to lay out, how to lay something out and how to get it to print and how to distribute it, how to sell it to a distributor and all that kind of thing. There was all kind of learning, on the go. And through doing that, I obviously had a relationship with Chaosium because obviously I, told them I'm doing this fanzine, and they basically came back and said, do you owe us any money? And I went, no, because I haven't made any.
I was about to say, I would assume you're still doing your quote unquote day job at this point, because from my understanding, you don't get to make a small fortune with a fanzine.
No, it was literally covering costs. So, but I obviously had a relationship with Lynn Willis, who was the line manager for Call of Cthulhu at Chaosium, and Charlie Crank, and I would, although Lynn never went to conventions, it was only Charlie. And Charlie would come to Europe to conventions in the UK and in Europe, so I would get to meet him. We got to know each other, and so occasionally from there, I was offered some freelance work for Chaosium, either writing something. Normally, it was editing stuff. It was there'd be something written about England in the modern day or the 20s or whatever, and they all went, well, you're English, you know what you're talking about. Can you look this over for us and just make sure it's doesn't sound stupid. So I did bits and pieces for Chaosium over the years. Nothing great big. I mean, there was a few. There was discussions about I was going to write this and I was going to write that, but I just never had the time to really do it justice. So I didn't want to kind of do a half-assed job. So.
Were you at that point saying, I really love doing this. This is something that I love, and maybe I'd want to move into being more involved with the industry? Or was it strictly a side thing for you and a hobby thing for you? I'm trying to get a sense of maybe when you started going, maybe I want to do this.
I mean, I think, to be honest, I'd always thought, wouldn't it be great to work in the games industry? But it was always wouldn't it be a great idea, without any real intent behind it, because it was kind of like, well, the games industry is in America and I live in England, and that just doesn't work, and so it was always a kind of a fantasy, really. It would be lovely to, but that's never going to happen. I should get on with my day job and pay the mortgage, and I should do this as a hobby, so I was working in an education kind of organization at the time, but I was a bit fed up there. I've been there a few years and I was ready for a change. It wasn't particularly challenging me anymore. And so I was looking through it was the Guardian newspaper, actually, their kind of media jobs. And one day there was a job at Games Workshop wanting an events manager. I went, well, I know. I played Games Workshop games. I know about events. I might as well give it a go, And so I had no expectation about it. And I applied, and I was kind of bowled over that I got an interview. And I went up, and and again, because I guess I wasn't, I don't want to say, I don't want it to sound wrong, but I wasn't impressed by Games Workshop. It was just another company to me.
Sure.
They happened to make toy soldiers, and I thought they were really cool, but in my eyes, it was just a company. And this was a job running events, which is what I'd been paid to do before. So when I did the interview, I wasn't awestruck by the people. I just said, well, if you want an event run, this is how you run an event, and just went through all the logistics. And I got a call about an hour later saying, I've got the job. So okay, fair enough. So I moved the family, and we moved up to Nottingham. And I started at Games Workshop on, what then was called the sales part of the business. So not creative, putting on events, marketing, promotions, all that kind of thing. And so at that point, I effectively began working in the gaming industry, although it wasn't really planned in that way. But obviously, working in Games Workshop is a fantastic opportunity to learn about the games industry and learn about the different components. And so I was rubbing shoulders with the likes of Gav Thorpe and Jervis Johnson, and I was flying off to America with those guys too. They'd be the guests at some American show. I'd be going to kind of see what the Americans do that I can steal ideas from for the UK. But I got to know them, and they're great guys. And but effectively for the first few years, I mean, I kind of looked after events and some marketing, and I kind of also took on what was the kind of UK community kind of activities of Games Workshop, working with schools and libraries,
right,
and clubs, and all that kind of thing. And when I was working at Games Workshop, it was the period of the Lord of the Rings was just coming out, 40K, Warhammer Fantasy. They were the only games really. They did. There was a few kind of smaller, older games. I'm trying to think of things like War Master and Necromunda, but they weren't. They were second-tier games at that point. In Games Workshop was very much, we only focus on three things: Warhammer, 40K, and Lord of the Rings, and nothing else. And it's all about tabletop miniatures. And so that was while I was there. But towards the end, well, not towards the end, but after a few years, that kind of started to change, and that's when Games Workshop rebirthed its board games and role-playing division called Black Industries, which was part of the literary arm of Games Workshop, Black Library, which obviously did all their fiction novels and comics and things like that. And because obviously everyone knew that I was a role player, because I didn't make a big secret of it, and I was putting out The Whisperer at this time as well.
Wow!
So there was obviously internal playtesting of their new, things like Warhammer Fantasy Second Edition. And then Warhammer 40,000, the Dark Heresy RPG. So I was part of the play. It went out to everyone in Games Workshop. It wasn't anything special, but so I kind of play tested stuff and sent information in, and that kind of stuff. And when the 40K one was being play tested, I had some reservations about the direction it was taking, which seemed to me going away from the core of what 40K was and the system and so forth, and it's one of them fortunate things that the overall manager of the Black Library was my ex-manager, basically. So when I said to him I have some reservations, he listened to me, whereas I was a known factor, so it was just kind of a bit of luck on that regard. So he listened to me and said, yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. And while he didn't necessarily do anything about what I said, I raised some flags, and then down the line there were some changes of direction made, which I guess part of my thing may have inspired or helped to stir on, perhaps. Then kind of Lord of the Rings not lost its thing, but kind of there was a downturn in Games Workshop product, which is fairly well known. And so a lot of the sales businesses were cut down staffing wise, and my position was slightly tenuous at that point as well.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, as if by magic, a head of Black Industries, the manager for the role-playing board games division, became vacant. So I applied and got that job. So I moved from sales into creation and publishing. And that was really what you might say is my first full-time real games industry job, because I was overseeing the Warhammer Fantasy line that was actually being developed and written by Green Ronin and particularly Rob Schwab, doing the fantasy work. And so I didn't, technically I didn't really need to do a lot because Rob knows what he's doing.
I
was giving it a once over, and basically, Rob would tell me, could you read this over and proofread that kind of stuff? So I was doing all that, but he knew what he was doing, so that was all not a problem. But really my main focus was on Dark Heresy, the 40k RPG, which had been kind of, 2/3 written when I joined. And we had it was like, well, we're supposed to publish it in 3 months. Can you finish it? Okay. So I then had I don't even remember how long I had, not very long, to basically read the whole thing, revise it, fill in all the gaps, make sure it actually worked, and then try and get it out on time printing. So which we did. I still remember me and our layout guy. We would just sit there all night. We for like 3 weeks, we sat there for nearly 16 hours a day, inputting, proofing corrections. Him with me with lots of paper with written up corrections, and him on the desktop. And I go, okay, page 3, paragraph 2, line 6, change the comma to a semicolon, but it was it's a big 400-page book, and there was a lot of typos. I mean, it was my first thing, so I no doubt created loads of them, but there was loads already. And so literally to the deadline, literally like the day before we were supposed to release it, we were working, 11 o'clock at night. We were, drinking coffee, getting it finished.
Wow.
But we got it out, and, with warts and all, but, and it was very successful, and sold through, I think it was 30,000 initial units was, sold into distribution, before the game was released.
Amazing.
And literally 2 days later, on January 28th, 2008, Games Workshop decided they weren't going to do role-playing games and board games anymore. And it would be far easier if they just licensed it all out to somebody like Fantasy Flight Games.
Yeah.
Which I completely understand was, yes, it would be a lot cheaper to do that. And so my position suddenly went from something to nothing. It was like, there is no job here. The entire division is now gone in 2 days after launching the game. So at that point, I felt that my time at GW was probably over.
Yeah.
And I left and went back into the real world for a while.
No kidding.
And so yeah, and that's back in the real world. Eventually, at some point, I was continuing game. I still gamed and went to conventions and did stuff. But it's around that time that Paul and I started talking about, isn't it time there was a new edition of Call of Cthulhu? This one's been out years. There are problems, and I think we could fix them. And and then that started the next kind of phase, really going into freelancing for Chaosium at that point.
So I'd be curious, Mike, when you finished staying up for 16 hours working, and then you find out the next day, that's it. Sorry, appreciate it. Did you think that was it? Your time as part of the gaming industry, you got a chance to do it, and now it's over? Or were you still wanting to do it? Because I could imagine walking away from that saying, screw this.
Well, yeah, I mean, now it had a taste of it, and it was real. You could get paid to do game stuff. It was kind of like, well, but again, I now face a problem because apart from Games Workshop, there really wasn't anyone else in the UK at that point. I mean, there'd been some other companies, but none of them were really employing full-time people, full-time, paying them an actual salary to make it realistic. So I kind of figured that, well, unless some American games company is going to turn around and say, we want you, it's not going to happen. And the likelihood of that happening is really slim. That's 99.9% that it won't happen. So I kind of just went, well, it was great. I had a great time, and I'm still role playing. I'm still enjoying it. I'm writing my own stuff. Maybe I'll do some. This was at a time when indie games were kicking off and all that kind of thing. I was thinking, or maybe I'll just start writing some indie stuff and I'll put that out. And if it goes anywhere, it goes anywhere. But I'm not going to worry about it. I kind of was thinking about that kind of thing, but again, I had a young family, had a new job, I had very little time, so it didn't really go very far. And it was, it took a while for life to kind of bed back into some sort of sense of normality. That it kind of, that the idea of putting together a new Call of Cthulhu rulebook kind of took shape, really. And that came out of a conversation at the convention with Paul, myself, and Charlie Crank, who at the time was the president of Chaosium. And
how does that conversation start, Mike? I mean, do you go up and go, your game needs some help and we might be able to help? Like, how does that conversation begin?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Charlie knew me and knew Paul a little bit, but knew me, through face-to-face contact at cons. He knew that I'd done The Whisperer. He knew about the Call to Chaos. He knew that I'd done freelance for Chaosium before. So he knew who I was. He knew that, Call of Cthulhu was my game. So I guess in that sense, I'd done the legwork to kind of be able to have him at least listen to what I had to say, even if he wasn't going to take it seriously. So the way it happened was Charlie was down to do a seminar on kind of a state of Chaosium address on a Sunday morning at this convention at Leicester, and so we went to the seminar as we would do, asked some questions and listened to what Charlie had to say, and then at the end when he was getting up to go and everyone else was leaving, I just said, Charlie, could we have a quick chat? I've got an idea to run by you. He went, yeah, sure. So we just sat in this room and said, look, what's your thoughts on, doing a new edition of Call of Cthulhu? It's been, over 10 years or more since 6th edition came out. And is that something you're even contemplating? He went, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Could you do it? And that was the conversation.
That's and what he said.
Yeah. Because I guess he knew us. He knew we had the passion to do it. And I think maybe we were just lucky that we were the first people to ask him. I don't know. Maybe if it'd been somebody else, they'd
Isn't
be doing
that something?
And then, then we sat down and talked about what the potentials could be and what we wanted to do. But I mean, it was from the word go, it was always the game has to be backwards compatible. You can refresh and change and fix things, but it's got to be backwards compatible. We don't want to. A D&D thing, which is a different game coming out called Call of Cthulhu. It's got to be the same game, and that's fine. That's what we want to do. We don't want to change the game in that sense. It's got to play the same because it's our favorite. We don't want to change our favorite game. We just want to, the lessons we've learned over how many years of playing it, to see whether we can fine tune some of the sharper, pointy bits on it. Really.
That's great.
And so for I don't know how many years it took us, 4 years on top of our kind of day jobs, working on this collaboratively, myself and Paul, until we had a kind of an initial kind of version, which then we put to play testing, and then kind of went from there really.
That's fantastic. Guys, we're going to take a quick break. When we get back from this break, I really want to dive into this new edition of Call of Cthulhu and really what was the way that Mike and Paul approached it? What are some of the big decisions that they made, and how did they make those decisions? We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Keith Suderman, and I'm a patron of Third Floor Wars. You'll never mistake me for a competitive player, but I really enjoy the analysis and the advice I get from Tabletop Talk. you should be a patron too. Head on over to patreon.com and search for Third Floor Wars, or just click the link in the show notes below.
Right Now is the part of many podcasts where someone comes on, interrupts the show, and explains that you should consider paying for the content you're already getting for free. They'll go on and explain that by giving $1 or more a month, you not only support the show, but you allow the show to grow and improve. Here on the Third Floor, we commit to not interrupting your episode of Tabletop Talk with such a plea. We pledge not to run a spot asking you to go to patreon.com and give $1 or more a month. Even if there's a link in this show's description, and there is, we won't ask you to click it and become a patron. We won't spend time yammering about the benefits like early access to episodes, getting those episodes without ad breaks, or even getting a chance to play in one of Craig's RPG sessions. Anyway, enjoy this episode. We needed to clarify that we wouldn't do this type of solicitation. I'd like to take a moment to give a shout out to some of the original patrons that started us on this journey. Special thanks to Jesse Ellis, Sam Newman, Nick Westbrook, Jim Ortiz, Kevin Smith, Keith Suderman, Matthew Riddle, Dane Leargard, Jeremy Peace, Wookie Gunner, Chris Blue, Vaslav, Kim Otto Nielsen, Rolf Randall, John Haas, Cody Hyatt, Michael Roper, Ambrose Ingram, Pudgy Hobbit, Kaiser and Crimson, Brandon Sommer, Jason Reddy, Jason Burry, Kylie Woodland, Brian Schooner, Alan Volts, and Owen. Because of you and the 100 other plus patrons, I'm able to put out content on a regular basis, and I appreciate it. Now, Mike, I have never made a new edition of a game, so I'm not sure whether this question is a good question or not, but in my mind, if you're going to make 7th edition Call of Cthulhu, it seems to me there's two things. One, identifying problems in 6th that need to be fixed, and then 2, what can we do to make it even better, right? So adding to it and fixing it. So I'd be curious, what needed to be fixed in your mind when you and Paul sat down and said, this is getting old, it's showing its age, there are some problems that need to be addressed. Do you remember what some of those were? Yeah.
I mean, the very first thing we did, we met up, because I lived in Nottingham still, and Paul lived in Milton Keynes, so about an hour away. So the very first thing I did when we started was I drove down to Milton Keynes on a Saturday. We got the 6th edition rulebook out, and we literally sat side by side, turning every page of the rulebook and going, that's good, that's brilliant, that's no problems there, that's where we got a problem. And we just went through every page. And one of the things, had always been my bugbear with 6th edition was that it wasn't very well organized. It was kind of a bit all over the shop. And if you were new to the game, it was kind of a nightmare. Why are there pages on combat rules here? And then 3 chapters along, there's all these optional combat things. Why aren't they together? It was that kind of really silly kind of stuff. Because it had organically grown through the editions, it had been added to, but never really reorganized and stripped back down and rebuilt. It was just been one of those things, And so that was, for me, number one is, if we want this game to be accessible to new people, it needs to be better organized. It needs to be a clearer kind of linear journey through the book, it's a beginning and an end. So that was one of the things we kind of identified. But there was a lot of things that really we knew already, because we were playing it week after week for, however many years. So things like the grappling rule, at the 6th edition, you get a group of keepers together and ask them to explain the grappling rules, and everyone would give you a different answer. It's just the reality of it, Everyone was then,
why do role playing games have such a hard time with grapple? I hear that, I've talked to so many designers, and I'm like, what did you struggle with? And they're like, the grappling.
Yeah, it's one of those things. So there are things like that. There was insanity. I mean, what Call of Cthulhu had was a sanity mechanic, which told you when you go insane. That's really where the mechanics stopped. There was nothing to tell you what you did after that point. It was very kind of hand wavy. And in our experience, which was not only home groups, but also playing with many people,
conventions,
many conventions, was that when a character went insane, whether temporarily or indefinitely, it was a real crapshoot. It was like, are they going to role play this in character? Are they going to have a silly half an hour where they just act stupid? Are they going to be a problem for the entire game where they now decided that they need to kill all of the player characters? Because it could be any of those, because there was no codification to it. And partly that, for me, that's kind of where Call of Cthulhu got a bad name, because it was kind of like, well, people are being silly when their characters are insane, which doesn't reflect well on the game.
Right. And it doesn't fit the feel.
No, it just didn't. But having said that, plenty of people were doing it really coolly and doing it in a way that was great. But it allowed for the interpretation to be anything. And so we felt that there needed to be some kind of definition to what insanity actually meant in the game in terms of mechanics and in terms of advice to GMs and players. So that was one area. The other areas was our kind of old bugbear with basic role play, BRP Chaosium games, was because they were based on a I go, you go system. I roll to hit, you roll to hit, and which let's face it, tended to translate to I miss you, you miss me, I miss you, you miss me, and 10 minutes later we're still missing each other and nothing's happened, and now the whole table is bored.
Right.
So we felt that could we get combat shorter? Could it be more dynamic? So that was one thing. We identified, I think it was Paul who particularly identified chases by saying, there's a massive chase in Shadow over Innsmouth and that kind of stuff. And it's just not in the game. There have been chase mechanics before, but they've always been kind of optional. They've always been kind of a kind of maybe in a supplement, but never really in the rule book. And at most, it's been an opposed dex roll, if anything, on the resistance table. There's never really been any kind of dynamism to it. And so that was one area that Paul was very keen to explore and see whether we could make chases as interesting a thing in the game as combat. Because, when in any role-playing game, as soon as you enter combat, you start playing a different mini game, don't you? And similarly for chase, it was like, well, could there be something that would work with the rules that did that? So those are kind of the big things. And over the course of 4 years of Paul trying out things, me testing the rules, me throwing ideas at Paul and saying, why don't we use luck to adjust roles? Why don't we make that a player agency kind of thing? And then Paul coming up with the things like pushing and all that kind of stuff. And over 4 years, we kind of, collaborated and kind of honed these down. I mean, some of the early stuff was really way out there and did not look like Call of Cthulhu, but we were kind of testing ideas really and then bringing them back or throwing them out and going, no, that's just not going to fit. Or this will fit, but it needs to look more like a Call of Cthulhu mechanic rather than something else. And
right.
So that was, it was very much a long phone calls every week, sending documents back and forwards, lots of notes on each other's work, arguments and agreements and all the usual kind of things when two people are working on the same thing they both feel very passionately about. So, yeah.
I'd be curious, Mike, as you and Paul were working on that, do you have a sense of when you started to get over the hill, right? So it's uphill battle. You're going through the 6th edition book. You're breaking down, this is garbage. This is great. You're tossing out ideas, some crazy stuff that you keep, some crazy stuff that you don't keep, and you refine and so on and so forth. When did you feel like suddenly you were going downhill? You're like, this is coming together now. Like I have a feeling of that. Was there a breakthrough, or was it just so gradual you didn't even notice when you kind of had turned the corner?
This is a different mind. This is how our different mindsets work. Paul is very kind of ideas are creative and kind of will keep messing with ideas and quite contentedly and keep going and keep tinkering. Whereas partly because I'd already worked in publishing, I kind of knew there was a deadline at some point. So I was the project manager in that sense of kind of, Paul,
Right.
we now need to finish this off. We need to, are you, I'm happy with the combat rules. Are you happy with the combat? Oh, yeah. Well, they're done then, aren't they? Let's not tinker anymore and move on and get this other bit finished. And so I was kind of the voice of reality and reason sometimes, which, Paul will obviously reflect back on it sometimes and go, we complement our styles in that way that, and so, because obviously we had this, me and Paul were working on this, and I don't know, year 3 or whatever, and we got to it was nearly summer of the 3rd year. We kind of had a rule set. We felt we kind of had the basis now that, all the kind of big stuff had been done. And we had very little coming back from Chaosium. Did they still want it? Are we gonna send it to them? And they're gonna go, no, sorry guys.
I'm sorry. Who are you?
Who are you? We expected this 2 years ago. No. We've already got 7th editions written. Forget it. Go
We're on
away.
8th edition, guys.
Yeah, we had no idea because unfortunately, one of the things of the time was the communication wasn't great. So Paul had decided anyway that he was going to go to US Gen Con that year. I couldn't go. He was going to go. And so we agreed what we would do is we would get the rules kind of like a self desktop published into a little booklet and get that printed. So we could literally give Charlie a copy of the rules and go, here is where we are. And basically force the issue by surreptitiously by saying, do you want it? Do you still want it? So he went off to Gen Con and gave Charlie the working rule set. And Charlie's already, yeah, carry on. Yeah, whenever you're ready. And so at that point, we said, okay, we've got a working rule set. We can now play test it. So we organized a worldwide play test. I know how many people, certainly more than 100 groups around the world got the playtest rules, and we gave them a few months to, pull it apart and tell us what we'd done wrong. And then we had their playtest feedback, but I also did a survey across the playtesters asking some, because I wanted to make sure I had some real key questions I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask, does it feel like you've been playing Call of Cthulhu? For me, which is the number one question. And then things that we were unsure about, like the whole luck spending rules. He said, did you find that they worked? Did you like them? And so we would ask these questions, very pertinent ones about some of the changes we'd made or kind of the direction we wanted to go. And so that survey went out, and it was and I have to say, really pleased with the players. I'm really thankful to the players because nearly all of them filled out the survey as well as sent in feedback. So that was fantastic. And it really helped the survey because overwhelmingly everyone came back with that, yes, this felt like we were playing Call of Cthulhu. So it was like, yes, job number one,
big deal.
Biggest thing we need to do. That's great. But it also really highlighted what were potential issues. And I used luck as a really straightforward one. There's the ability to spend your luck points in the game. Me and Paul were umming and ahhing about it, going because we'd had our personal feedback from the groups we'd been playing, and some people liked it, some people didn't, and we couldn't get a sense of it. We couldn't get a sense of whether this was people really didn't like it or really did like it. And of course, the results came back from this massive survey, and it literally was 50% of people liked it, 50% of people didn't like it. Which is kind of, what do we do now?
Yeah.
So that's when I said, you know what we do? We make it an optional rule because everyone that likes it can use it, and everyone that doesn't like it can just ignore it, and it's not going to be a problem. And so that, by putting that in that way, allowed us to then to look at some of the other optional stuff and go, actually, at the end of every chapter, if there's some kind of cool rules that we think are kind of cool but aren't really core, and maybe some people, some of the old grognards may not like some of the new stuff, we make this optional, and people can choose, and we literally make what, a role-playing game that's 30 years old at the time, what it should be is a toolkit. And we, here's the core rules we all agree on, everyone can do this. Then here's the optionality you can tweak to make the game how you want to play it. And so that's the kind of direction we went, of trying to make it as much as a toolkit for people as if you that was just seemed to make a sensible way to do it.
Well, it's such a I admire you and Paul so much because it's such a dangerous proposition because, first of all, and you knew this because it was true for you, you're dealing with a beloved thing, right? Like people, I've never talked to anybody, Mike, that I go, hey, do you like Call of Cthulhu? And they'll go, yeah, it's fine. They either love Call of Cthulhu, or it's just not their game. So you've got just a passionate group of people that were playing six, that were abusing it the way you guys did, playing it all the time. And, you come in and you want to make some changes. You want to improve some things. But it sounds to me like, and I'll use the luck system as an example and tell me if I'm off here. Like when I hear you tell me like half people, I loved it, by the way. As soon as I saw that, I fell in love with it. But now that hearing you talk about it, I realize it's almost a style thing, isn't it? Right? Like depends on how you run the game and what type of game you're running. Like when I read it, when I first got 7th edition, because I think it was like 4th edition was where I was playing before then. I was like, oh, that's nice. That's now I get to see, that for me, it fixed some problems. Right. But I could definitely see, depending on the type of game you were running, it wouldn't. And do you get a sense that maybe that's what it was, why it was such a split?
I think very much it's a style thing. And there's plenty of people who have been playing Call of Cthulhu since it came out. And to be frank, whatever the rule set kind of was in their head when they started playing, despite whatever edition they claim to be playing, they've been playing their version of Call of Cthulhu for 20 plus 30 years.
So true.
And it looks like no actually published edition. Because I tell you what's amazing, because we made ourselves read page, end to end, 6th edition. And we would, because we were just like everyone else.
You're playing it wrong.
We were playing Call of Cthulhu that we'd remember. I've read the rules years ago. I knew I could refer to it when I needed to. But I know BRP. I can run this game, and I've been doing it very successfully for some years, just like everyone else.
Yeah.
But when you read the rules and go like, "Did you realise there was a rule for this?" And Paul would look at me and go like, "No," and then he'd find something else. And go, "Crikey! I don't even remember ever reading that." And so one of the things I still, I'm reminded of to this day from various conversations I have is people glance at rules. They don't read them. Very rarely read them. It's funny. There was a Twitter thread the other day that Paul was involved in. Somebody was talking more generally about role playing and talking about which books have really good kind of GM advice and player advice in them. And Call of Cthulhu got mentioned along the lines of, is there anything, which books would be good that have some good advice in for Call of Cthulhu? Or what advice would you suggest, Paul? And Paul went, well, me and Mike put all of our ideas into the rules.
We wrote it down.
There's a chapter called Playing the Game, which is exactly this thing. And Paul went, I kind of get the impression that, the person who was talking, you haven't read that. And he went, no, I didn't realise. No. I've been playing the game 7th edition, but I hadn't bothered reading that chapter. I didn't realise it was there. Oh, I'll now go and look now you've told me. And it's surprising how many people will glance through the rules or read them once and then not take them in, and then quite happily go on a forum and tell you what you've done wrong or why the rules don't work or why haven't you put this advice in. And me and Paul just screaming at the PC going, but it is in there. Read the bloody rule book. But, there you go. That's life. So yeah,
I just have this image of somebody on a forum somewhere going, I have no idea, I have so much trouble running chases in Call of Cthulhu. And you're like, there's a whole section on running chases. Have you even tried to read? That's amazing. That's amazing. But I got to tell you, Mike, I've been guilty of it, man. It's
we all do it.
Yeah, and I loved your phrasing of saying we all glance at rules. Very rarely do we read them. God, that hurt a little bit. That was so very true. That was very, very true. I felt attacked, Mike. I am very, very guilty of it. So, boy, oh boy, you send this thing out, and for those of you listening, a lot of you aren't as old as I am, and as old as Mike is, and I don't know if you realize. Like, you know, there's D&D and there's Call of Cthulhu. Like, those were and are the biggies, right? The big giants in the room, and so beloved by it. Like, how scary was it to have that thing unleash on the world, to finally push it out and have Chaosium saying, we have a new edition, and having all of these people going, oh, you're going to, screw up my game. Is this going to be, Warhammer 3rd edition? Is this going to be, 4th edition D&D? What are you doing? What was it like when it got out there?
It was very weird because, there was a lot of people who had already made their mind up.
Yeah.
That, all they needed to know that there was a new edition, and we'd changed a few things that they'd already made their mind up before they played it or read it, that it was bad. And so there was a sizable proportion of old players who decided it was bad before it even come out, and would moan on about it and change for change's sake. It was a great line. And then there was a load of other people that play tested it who had come back and gone, actually, we really like it. We're still using the playtest stuff. We're continuing to use it. It's great. We can't wait to come out. And so it goes out and it kind of gets pretty good reviews. There was a handful of people. I mean, and there were certain forum sites for Call of Cthulhu where they would loiter and lurk together and have a big moaning party about how we've ruined their fun. Like, well, I'm not sure how we've ruined your fun. You mean we've not told you don't have to burn all your old rule books now. You could just carry on playing how you've been doing for 30 years. And to be frank, you weren't using a rule book then either. You were making your note as you went. You could just carry on doing that. But apparently, we've caused some great offense, and you can no longer live, with the fact there's a new edition out. And so there's some very silliness like that. But I mean, that was the minority of people. And that kind of had this kind of, that kind of went on for, a handful of years. There was this kind of group who, weren't going to budge. And it's like, that's fine. I don't care. You don't need to buy it. If you don't want to buy it, that's great. Carry on. If you're playing Call of Cthulhu, I'm pretty happy. It doesn't really matter what edition. If you're playing 7th, great. But, if you're still playing 6th, get on with it. And to be frank, as I keep saying, you weren't playing 6 really, were you? You were playing whatever edition
exactly right.
you'd made in your head. But anyway, but what I noticed pretty quickly, and this kind of obviously grew and became more noticeable as time went on, was the number of people returning to Call of Cthulhu and people coming to Call of Cthulhu who had never played before because of 7th edition. So I knew a bunch of gamers my age who Call of Cthulhu wasn't their game, but they liked playing at conventions. They liked playing it once in a while. But at some point, they'd got switched off from it. It just wasn't their thing anymore. And some of those people, came into the playtest because, they wanted to see what was going on. Others kind of picked up the book afterwards. And I would go to a convention. I would bump into these people. I kind of, were more acquaintances and friends. Who would turn around and go like, what you've all done is great. I really like the game now. I couldn't get on with it before, but what the things you've done in it allow me to kind of play the game I want to play. And so for me, that was really cool. But for me, the biggest success was actually new people were coming to the game, because I think the game had got to a point where it was still a very popular game, but it had kind of stagnated. The material wasn't very new player friendly.
Yeah.
And Call of Cthulhu is one of those games. It's like D&D. It's a gateway game, as I call it. It's, yes, there are a lot of D&D players who go on to then play Call of Cthulhu, or they come into role-playing through some other game and then discover Call of Cthulhu. But equally, there are plenty of people that come to role-playing through Call of Cthulhu.
Dude, no
so it's
question.
One of those games that actually attracts new gamers. And so seeing that happening was for me like the biggest success, really, because obviously my number one is I love the game. I'd like the game to continue being played and run. And so that can only happen if new people start playing the game, because at some point, all of us old people will eventually...
We will die off.
We will die off, and so will the game. So actually putting out an edition that kind of it basically revitalized the line. And so I was seeing that through obviously sales, but also through the kind of, the forums and turning up on forums where you wouldn't expect it to turn up, and young people talking about Call of Cthulhu, which was
God forbid,
fantastic. Yeah. So that's really what kind of I saw happening in that way.
So I'm going to share my story real quick, Mike, because I think you might appreciate it because it touches on the success. So I get back into role playing again, and Call of Cthulhu was one of my favorites. It was Call of Cthulhu and Chill. Those were that's how old I am, by the way. I just loved them, right? Loved them. And one gave me one type of horror and one gave me another type of horror. I get back into role playing. I'm like, I really like horror has always been my favorite. And even when I'm not playing horror, I'm still playing horror because I inject that into almost every game I play. So I ordered 7th edition. And I got the slipcase and the whole thing, and I was just like, Jesus, this is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, right? But I'm not gonna tell you, I sat down and I was just like I thought it was gonna be. I went with a mentality. This was taken from previous editions. Like, I got to study for my exam now. Like, this is going to be an arduous process of me digesting this all again and taking this all in and getting it all sorted in my head. And I start flipping through it, and it's beautiful. And it wasn't the previous editions weren't beautiful, but there was a obvious new attention being put upon how it looked. And then I was just like, oh yeah. Oh wow. Like, this isn't that bad. And to a certain degree, I wondered, had my memory fogged, right? Did I remember it being kind of a pain in the ass game a little bit before, and now it's not? And it's really interesting that you guys, that was something that you focused on, was making it accessible, and it worked. It's amazing.
Well, thanks for that. I mean, that was, as you say, the intent. Was to make it played like it had always played, but just try and as I always say, to try and streamline a few things. Combat would go a bit quicker. Because combat was now an opposed role. Something should happen. By the end of round 1 or 2, somebody should have been hit. That kind of thing, just to kind of move things along. So, yes. Yeah,
that's great.
So that was nice to sort of see that kind of revitalization happen, and of course, around this time, prior to actually 7th edition officially coming out, obviously the management team changed at Chaosium, and there was a new what's the word for it? A kind of a fresh outlook, a kind of a new enthusiasm, which obviously myself and Paul had kind of brought that in with us with this new edition. But obviously then to have that backed up with the management team with a lot of new aspirations and creativity was a fantastic kind of meeting of minds and in the timing of that. So that was very fortunate in that way. It's like, I love it when people really, and this is what they did early on. And occasionally it comes upon a forum and somebody has a real moan about, why, the rule book is like 450 pages long. There's no need, just so big, too many rules. And you kind of go, qualify your statement. And yes, there is a section of the rule book that contains rules across, 3 or so chapters, which are the core rules. Everything else is added value. It's a load of monsters, spells, scenario plots, stuff on how to play. It's not all rules. And people love to kind of go, oh, it's 400 pages of rules. No, it's that much rules, that much added value.
Exactly. Have you read the book? That's what it comes back to.
Yeah, basically, comes back to that.
Oh, that's funny. So, guys, we're going to take a quick break, and before we get back from this, or when we get back from this break, so as I was going out there and talking to people, and I was starting to have conversations about, boy, the Call of Cthulhu is not exactly what I remember to be, and I like it better now. And more than a few people said to me, do you like Call of Cthulhu? But have you tried Pulp Cthulhu? because that I've learned has its own subsection of fanatics as well. And I figured out why when I picked up the book. So we're going to come back. I want to talk to Mike about Pulp Cthulhu and where it came from and how it was made. We'll be right back. Howdy friends, Craig here. Nothing makes Malifaux easier than having the right tools. Here at the third floor, we love all the licensed Malifaux goodies from Custom Meeple. Not only are they helping support this podcast, they sell custom-made weird licensed tokens and terrain. They sell it all. Crew boxes, terrain, markers, tokens, and even a 3x3 full Malifaux board. Custom Meeple sells a complete M3E token set covering every marker and token you need to play. Custom Meeple are the source for the official accessories for Malifaux. Everything is designed by hand and authorized by Weird Games. Check them out at custommeeple.com, that's with one M, or follow the link in the show notes. Up your Malifaux game and be sure to tell them Craig from the third floor sent you. If you use the promo code Third Floor Friend, all one word, THIRDFLOORFRIEND, you'll get a 5% discount and help support the podcast. It's valid on everything except retail products and playmats. So, Mike, as you were, finishing up 7th, working on 7th, where was Pulp Cthulhu in your mind? Was it not even present whatsoever? Was it something that was tickling the part of your brain? Were you taking stuff that you found in 7th and go, this doesn't quite fit, let's set it aside, and that becomes Pulp Cthulhu? I'm interested to hear, where the seeds of Pulp Cthulhu come from.
They come from two completely different sources. When we were doing the 7th edition rules, there was a section that got created that were pulpy rules. But it was only a handful. It was just maybe you could do. I'm trying to remember how they were now, what they even covered. But there was literally a few paragraphs that were kind of like, if you want a more pulpy style of play, maybe you'll double the hit points of your character, that kind of thing. It wasn't anything big. So they existed and they kind of sat around in the rule book before obviously anything happened with it. And during the Kickstarter, Chaosium were, flailing around for things they could add as stretch goals. And they go, well, what would be cool? And Pulp Cthulhu is one of those kind of mystical books because Pulp Cthulhu was mentioned in an old Call of Cthulhu book, 10 plus years before the Kickstarter, coming soon. And it never came soon. It never came. Right. It was everyone got excited. Oh, Pulp Cthulhu. And then for 10 years, nobody heard a thing. It was just tumbleweed. And so during the Kickstarter, it was like, well, we could put Pulp Cthulhu out. And I went, and me not, because obviously at this time I was a freelancer. I wasn't working for Chaosium. I obviously in my head going, oh, the manuscript is sat there. It probably just needs a bit of a polish and an update, and we can get Pulp Cthulhu. That'd be cool. Yeah. So I go, yes, of course. Yeah, let's do that as well. And so it kind of it was in the Kickstarter, and obviously the stretch goal was met, so it became part of the project. So cut forward, I clear my desk of everything else and go like, oh, I need to get this Pulp Cthulhu book done because obviously it's one of the Kickstarter rewards. That's next priority. So can
you send it over to me so I can look at it?
So yes, send me what you have, and I get a link. I get a link to a folder on the shared drive, and it's called Pulp Cthulhu, and I go in and go like, I'm literally looking around this haunted house, going, where, what?
Sorry, the file didn't come through.
And there are a handful of Word documents, and what there is, it says one scenario. It's got a massive scenario, and there's a file that kind of Pulp rules, and then there's a big file which looks like the most complete one about the Vanguard Club, written by James Lauder, in fact, and okay, so that's a scenario. I don't need to worry about that yet. That can just sit there. That's great. But great, I've got one scenario at least. There's some background stuff on the Vanguard Club. That's cool. That looks okay. Put that over there. Okay, open the main one, which is the Pulp rules. Okay, right. So this is just not in any way written. It's just some ideas, and it was, it was literally like, imagine, somebody's day one, they go like, oh, we want you to write pulp rules, and they've opened their desktop, Word document, and they've literally for the day just put some ideas down, as in, oh, maybe more actiony, some sort of role for jumping off buildings, and literally that was it. And it was just like,
wow.
And I kind of went, this isn't any. There are no rules there. In fact, there was only one rule. It was just like, if players want to do something really pulpy, get them to make a skill roll. But that's already a rule. It's not a new rule. It's already That's Call of Cthulhu. So I kind of took a big sigh and went, okay, so we've got these pulp rules in the rule book. Let me take them out of the rule book, and that can be the starting point. And that literally then, the 3 or 4 kind of pulpy style rules we put in there as an option. I said to Paul, I'm just going to remove all of that and put it into Paul. He went, yeah, good idea. So then I sat down and then worked out, what is pulp? And of course, the number one problem with pulp is no one knows what it is, or more rightly, everyone thinks it's what they think it is. And there is no definitive answer other than pulp is pulp fiction of the 20s, 40s. That's what it means. It's pulp paper. It happens to be some fiction that was written on pulp paper. That's what pulp means. It doesn't mean anything in gaming terms other than a kind of a vague sense of action.
Well, it's like, what is it they say about porn? Like, I can't define it for you, but I know when I see it, right? It's got a very similar aspect
Same with
to it.
pulp. Yeah.
Yep.
So the number one thing I thought about was I can't, if I put down what I think is pulp, everyone's going to turn around and say I've got it wrong, and I'm going to get moaned at. So that ain't going to work. So that's why I came up with the idea of actually this needs to be a sliding scale. You need to be able to play Call of Cthulhu and turn a dial and add a little bit of pulp, or turn it full and have it full pulp, whatever that may look like. So the very kind of day one was, okay, it needs to be a sliding scale of some kind. I'm not sure what that's going to look like, but that's got to be the basis of it. And then I just, worked through, and I kind of, built off some of the rules in 7th edition about, using luck, about, we could do more with luck. We could make it more of a utility thing. Pulp's about larger than life characters. So having that scaled into the character generation with pulp archetypes of, there are certain types of character that come out of pulp. Why don't we make sure that players understand what they are and they can choose? I want to be the fighter. It's kind of like, choose your class really, but it's, I want to be I want to play the shadow. I want to play such and such detective. So trying to, come up with generic archetypes that we could mesh into the system. And then, pulp characters are normally good at least one thing. They are they're not superheroes, but they're kind of better than your average Joe. And Cthulhu is about your average Joe, really. You might be an expert librarian or scientist, but you are, in theory, average people. So introducing the kind of pulp talents to give people an edge, something they were good at or known for, that they could build their character around. So that seemed like a natural kind of fit. And of course, if you've got larger than life player characters, pulp is all about larger than life villains, and Cthulhu's already got some pretty cool larger than life villains, but actually
a little bit,
turn the dial up for pulp ones and really, make them, the evil cultist mastermind with 1,000 faces and all that kind of really kind of, go back to the source material and try and have fun with that. And so it was really kind of instilling, the ideas I had for what I thought pulp was, broadening that with actual, going back and looking at the real pulps and looking at the differences and looking at the ideas that came from that, the kind of characters and the villains, and thinking, well, what makes it Call of Cthulhu, but what twists it into, we would kind of recognize it, say it's pulp. Well, killer robots. The Mego make robots and science and all that kind of thing. Why can't they make killer robots? Why can't there be time travel, which there is with the Yithians? Well, if there's time travel in pulp, that would mean dinosaurs. So why can't there be dinosaurs? So it was just taking the idea and pushing it. You take with Cthulhu, you knew kind of where the limit was. And with Pulp Cthulhu, it was kind of like, okay, I'm going to go past that limit because that's Call of Cthulhu. I'm going to push it into kind of, and I just had the kind of motto: bigger is better, more wild, more wacky. And because with the dial, the idea that you could scale it, it meant that you could go big and wacky. But if that wasn't your style, you just dial it back down and not have that. Yeah. So it allowed me to kind of, really kind of play around with the genre in that way. And one thing I haven't said is where the idea for Pulp Cthulhu actually originally come from, which is worth a mention because it came from Dustin Wright, who still works for Chaosium, is the oldest in terms of the longest serving Chaosium employee. Dustin looks after our retail distribution, and make sure products end up on your doorstep. They end up in the gaming stores. He's kind of one of the most vital people in Chaosium because without him, all you'd have is a few PDFs. So, and Dustin was in there, a long time. And I think Dustin literally went to see Indiana Jones one day and walked out going, well, that's kind of like Call of Cthulhu, but either way, it could be Pulp Cthulhu. And that's where the idea was born. So, all credit to Dustin for being the one who kind of realized actually this could fit with what we call Call of Cthulhu. It just took a long time to be birthed, unfortunately.
Yeah, it took a little bit. So I love that idea of the dial or the sliding scale, Mike. So I want to, if you go back in time to the Cult of Keepers and how you were running games back then and how some of those Cult of Keepers running the games then. And let's say 1 is strict Call of Cthulhu, no pulp. 10 is, dials all the way up. We're going to go fight dinosaurs. Was there anybody that was already playing around out of your Cult of Keepers or even yourself that was starting to push those limits a little bit and push into pulp? Or was this really all new territory for you and for that group going back and looking at it? I'm wondering how much of it had already seeped in.
I think elements had. I mean, one of the very first scenarios, I didn't write this one, somebody else contributed it, was about time traveling dinosaurs. You were on some country estate in England, and these kind of, carnivorous dinosaurs were popping up and murdering people, and you were finding their bodies and not knowing, it's a werewolf. No, it's a dinosaur, time traveling dinosaur. So things like that kind of seeded in, I guess, but to be honest, I never thought about them in with the word pulp. I just thought, oh, that's a cool idea. It's a bit wacky. And so there were, I think, some scenarios that came out through the Cult of Keepers that were kind of a little pulpier. And again, it would come down to the person who's writing them. Some people tended to be more pulp focused, even though they didn't know it. Others were more kind of, grim and dark. And I tended to be kind of in the middle, but I also I'm one of these people. I cannot be horrific on a Sunday morning at 10 o'clock game. It doesn't work. I can't make an atmosphere of horror at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning. It just doesn't work. So with running games at conventions, because of the need to I'd find myself on a Saturday or Sunday morning or even afternoon running a game of Cthulhu. You try and make it, scary-ish, but actually it becomes, particularly with me, I see the funny side in things a lot of the time. So a player will do something and I'll just start laughing, going like, really, are you doing that? Really? and it becomes a, much more of a comedy Cthulhu in a sense, without it being silly. We try and keep true to the game and the spirit, but you find the inherent humor in the actions of the characters or the situations they find themselves in. We all just have a good laugh, and it's a good fun game. But it's not alienation and horror. You're not walking away quaking in your boots. But we save that for the late night game on the Saturday or whatever. But so in that sense, being a bit pulpy with those kind of more comedic kind of games was a very natural thing, particularly for me, I guess, as well. So that, I think, while consciously I hadn't really thought about that, but unconsciously, yeah, I guess there was some kind of some seeds of that already there in terms of when I came to think about pulp more clearly.
That's fantastic. And I got to tell you too, Mike, the two hardback books that I got that have scenarios and things in there, well, campaigns, they're brilliant. Like I started both of them. I started reading it. And I'm like, I need to run this tomorrow. Like, this is really exciting to have the Pulp Cthulhu built off of and just have that capture the worldwide conspiracy and just fantastic stuff, man. Fantastic stuff. So guys, we're going to take one more break. When we get back from this break, I'm going to take advantage that we have got a person who for a couple of years now has been running Call of Cthulhu and running Lovecraftian horror. And I want to kind of pick Mike's brain a little bit. We'll be right back. There are so many online retailers. It can be hard to find one that is trustworthy, has great prices, along with some reliable customer service. On the third floor, we love ordering our gaming goodies from Gadzooks Gaming. Their selection of terrain, miniatures, dice, custom decor, and conversion bits are curated for gamers by gamers. You'll find they have what you need and what you didn't know you needed to take your gaming fun to the next level. If you mention Third Floor Wars in the cart notes of your order, you'll also get a free gift. And you'll help support the podcast. Check out gadzooksgaming.com and mention Third Floor Wars on checkout to get that free gift. So if we were to go into Google right now, Mike, and Google Cthulhu RPG, not only do we have everything that's coming out of Chaosium, but it seems like every single game company has got Cthulhu Fate, Cthulhu this, Cthulhu that, right? It is everywhere. So I'd be curious, like, why do you think that is? Why do you think the Lovecraftian mythos seems to translate to RPGs to the point where people have an appetite for it? Every system out there wants to have a touch of this in it. Do you have a sense of why that might be?
I think Cthulhu is a popular kind of cultural thing that, it wasn't really there when I started playing Call of Cthulhu, but, the game, Stuart Gordon's films, movies that come out subsequently, TV shows now, it's kind of built the consciousness, and people kind of, tentacly kind of crazy things. Seems a lot of fun. It's kind of cool. And so I think there's a certain kind of cachet that goes with that. There's a certain knowledge that if you stick tentacles in a box, you might sell a few more. Let's be honest. Let's put the word Cthulhu on there because it will sell a few more. And it doesn't hurt that Lovecraft's IP is public domain, so we don't have to pay anyone for it. I'm just being honest, and these are these things. I mean, obviously, Chaosium for many years paid for royalties and licensed Lovecraft's IP, and we still, even though that's public domain now, there are plenty of living authors or authors who are still in copyright of the Lovecraft Circle and post-Lovecraft Circle who are still around and in copyright that we pay licensing to use their material for, because as it's only right and fair to do. Without going off on one about many other companies that don't do that, and maybe need to have a word with themselves. But I think all of those things, just being honest, make Cthulhu a popular proposal in that sense. But of course, people can see what's good and bad too. It's very if you're let's use the term broadly, a Cthulhu fan rather than Call of Cthulhu fan. It's pretty clear where most of the time where this name has been stuck on to sell more, or this name has been stuck on because the people actually wanted to do something really good with it.
Right.
We do get there's a difference in products, and some of the products, some of the board games, some of the stuff is really great. I mean, some of this stuff. board game stuff that obviously Fantasy Flight now, Asmodee have done have been fantastic. I love playing them. Some other board games I played with the word Cthulhu on haven't been so good. But that's life. That's the same for any role play property or gaming property in that sense. But I think that Cthulhu has risen in the public consciousness. There were a long time when it was very niche, and only me and my mates who role played knew what Cthulhu was, and we were really cool because we knew something that you lot didn't. And there's plenty of little IP pockets, of things like that where people, it's kind of cool because we're the only ones who know about it.
Yeah.
But eventually, if it is really cool, a lot of other people come to know about it, and at some point you have to go, great, more people is good. Occasionally there are some people that don't like more people because they want it to be their thing. But
don't get me started. Don't get me started.
They can go and sit in their dark corner with their sad mates and tell sad tales.
And then die off.
That's not how the world works, I'm afraid. But and at the end of the day, hand on heart, if I could, double barrel some of the worst offenders out of existence, I would. But equally, I'd rather them be there if there's more, love for Cthulhu, the Cthulhu mythos in that sense. I mean, I put that aside from Lovecraft with his baggage and problems. That's a completely
different
other
thing, man.
But in terms of having fun with horror, getting having healthy scares, enjoying just like we do with a horror fiction or a horror film, have a good fun. That's what it's about for me, and so the more of that, the better. More people understand what Cthulhu. I mean, there was a time, believe me, when you go, I play Call of Cthulhu. People went, what?
I know.
I mean,
I remember that time.
Forget about trying to explain what a role-playing game was. Just explain what Cthulhu is. And now, well, there's not really a need to do that because people get it. People know what Cthulhu is.
You can buy Cthulhu plushies.
yeah. Well, you can turn on HBO and see Cthulhu on that, and it's great.
Man, when I had not read Lovecraftian Country, so I was not familiar with the source material. And I remember watching that show going, I'm watching a role-playing game, like session from session. This is Call of Cthulhu. That's what I'm watching. Just brought to life. It was incredible. So Mike, as you talk about something that's very, very true. I wonder, do you feel like you have an internal litmus test for yourself? Is there certain elements that make it to you say, yes, this is not pasted on Cthulhu. This what they're doing with this board game, with this take on the role-playing game or whatever, this is Cthulhu, but this doesn't feel like Cthulhu to me, even though they used the word. Are there some elements that you use to test that, or is it just a gut feeling, or like how do you sort that in your head?
I mean, mainly it's a gut feeling, but when you look into the detail, is it the dividing line is very clearly this. In fact, I was talking to some friends the other night about this. The dividing line for me is this: someone has read the fiction or they played Call of Cthulhu and they kind of like it, they love it, but it's not quite right for them, and they've gone away and gone like, I'm going to sit in my bedroom and I'm going to write a new role-playing game because that's what I want to do, and I'm going to do it better than you guys, and that's fine because that's what everyone does, and that's cool if they come up with their own take that is not Call of Cthulhu, but it's a different thing. It's a different system. It doesn't try to model Call of Cthulhu. It's just their take on the Cthulhu mythos or horror in gaming. That's great because it's their creativity and their originality. And I will learn something by playing it. I will enjoy it. It will be cool. The other side is I've read and played Call of Cthulhu, and now I'm just going to copy it because I want to basically do my version of Call of Cthulhu, file the serial number off, and it's basically the same game, but it's my version of it. Well, that's fine. I have no problem with you doing that, but why are you trying to persuade people to buy it? Because, because I'm old, I remember a time before the internet. People did that then, and they did that in the privacy of their bedrooms and gaming tables, and you did your hacks, as you would call it now, of the system, and that's fine. We all did. I do it. I did it, and that's cool. That's cool. I never expected anyone to buy my thought on it, though, because it's just a hack of an existing property. Go and buy the existing property and hack it all you like. But to go and put that game out that's the same thing with the file numbers sealed off, kind of like, well, that's just pants as far as I'm concerned. It's like, what, have more respect for yourself. Go and write something original. Go and do something cool, and I will applaud you and buy it. But when you're just ripping off stuff, it's kind of like, well, that's for me as a writer. That's my life. If it was a fiction, if I was a fiction writer the same way, I'm sure I'd be the same. If somebody just rewrote my story, it would be the same thing. I'd just go, well, that's plagiarism, isn't it? But I'm not saying it is in role playing because it's not quite the same thing. But I guess what I'm saying is people being creative and coming up with new expression and new thoughts on things is I'm 100% behind, and I think that's great because we all get something from that. Where it's just people retooling what's already out there. I don't know what I'm not sure what the benefit is.
You haven't added anything.
Other than to yourself by selling a few things on drive-through or whatever it might be, and that's I'm not going to cry about it, and all good luck to you if that's what you want to do. Fine, I'm not. I am the fun police will not be knocking on your door. I've got plenty of other things to get on with. So
sure.
You carry on. Good luck to you, basically.
So, Mike, before we started recording, you and I had a conversation. You'd asked me, about my audience, and I kind of explained to you the origins of the podcast, which means that we've got some people listening right now that have never played Call of Cthulhu before. And I'd be curious if they're starting to itch and go, boy, this sounds like something that I might want to do. Have you found any successful tips for first-time people? So if someone says, you know what, I'm going to find a Call of Cthulhu game after listening to Mike talk, and I'm going to play it. Has there been any advice that has worked for you over time of saying, hey, this is your first time playing Call of Cthulhu. This is what you should keep in mind?
Okay. I think I see this question asked a lot on forums and, threads on Reddit and Discord and whatnot.
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of people play D&D, let's be honest. It's the biggest game. And so people may enter the game, role-playing games through D&D, and then they go and look for other things to do. Call of Cthulhu is one of the things other people come to do. And what I mean, maybe this, I don't know, I may have this wrong, but it seems to me that newer gamers or ones who have come into role-playing in the last few years, whereas before, to us, it just seemed very natural that if you buy a different game, it's going to be a different game.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is, but I see on this forums, I see people kind of expecting Call of Cthulhu to be kind of D&D or to play like D&D. And it's kind of, no, it's not. It's not. If I put in Call of Duty on the PlayStation and then I put in, I don't know, the Legend of the Elder Scrolls
or whatever. Legend of Zelda, whatever. Yeah.
I will expect a completely different game. Yeah. And but sometimes I do see, I'm not saying everyone does this, but I do see this kind of expectation of people kind of go, what do you mean it's not D&D? I thought it was kind of going to be like, I thought it was like a role-playing game. Yeah, it is a role-playing game. It's just not D&D. It's not, right. So it's not, Traveller or whatever old game I'm going to come out with. So I think, come with an open mind is, I guess, what I'm trying to say with that. Yeah. Come with an open mind and understand, as it says on the book's title, on the cover, it's a game of horror and mystery. And so it is about plots, it is about story, and it is about telling a story. So your character is a part of that story that you help to tell, but like every story, it has an ending. And so some stories will go on, you may play a campaign or have the character go on for a long time, but at some point your character will end. They will not ascend to another dimension. They will not become a godlike being of infinite power. It is not that game. Yeah. You are playing normal people. And so that's the kind of the general advice, and about, finding the story and the heart and the heroic in your character who is, a waitress, a teacher, a crossing guard, whatever it may be. Finding the heart in your character is what it's all about.
That's so cool.
It isn't about being the librarian. It isn't about being the crossing guard. That's just your job. That's just where you got to in life.
Yeah.
Now you find yourself thrust into something unbelievable, horrible, scary, frightening. It's how do you deal with that? That's what Call of Cthulhu is at the heart of its game. It's what your character does, and find. I like to say, finding the heart of your character, and finding heroism in the face of insurmountable odds is really about about being heroic. How do you be heroic when you can't win? And that is the infinite, unanswerable question that we seek when we play Call of Cthulhu. And equally, or if that doesn't appeal, as we've talked about before, go and play Pulp Cthulhu and punch evil in the face, and that's cool too. And that, one of the things I try to get across is that Call of Cthulhu is the game that you want it to be, because it is so malleable.
It is.
It's why there are so many different settings. It's why it fits. You can play Space Cthulhu. You can play Stone Age Cthulhu. You can play French Revolution Cthulhu. You can play 1920s, modern day. Mm-hmm. They all work because the system is very malleable, because it's about the human experience. It isn't about the mechanics of me being better than you in that sense. It's not that kind of game. And ultimately, in the sense of practicality, I would say, look at the products we put out there for beginners. Don't jump into the deep end unless you are, I don't know, a masochist. We put out a free downloadable quick start that will gives you the basics. You can tip your toe in the water. And I'll be the first to say, Call of Cthulhu is not a game for everyone. But if you read the quick start and you kind of get excited, it might be for you. So give it a go. Your next step is possibly the starter set, which, funnily enough, is made for people starting the game. It teaches you the basics in a very kind of hands-on way. And the reason we have these products there I've worked on these to try and make them as easy and accessible for people to get into, because I understand that buying a 450-page rulebook is not an easy way into a game. That's for when you really know you want to play this game, and you are committed. But to get to that point, it is about finding your way as easily and as quickly as possible. Which is why, in the starter set, the first thing you do is you pick up your dice and you play on your own a solo adventure, that while you're playing an adventure to get a feel for, do I like this kind of thing? It's also teaching you how to play it, teaching the mechanics as you go. So by the time you get to the 20-page core rule book, you kind of know that already. And you can scoot through that and then get playing. I mean, that's the whole point. And I'm kind of rambling. I now am rambling on, but that's
well, I'll tell you, Mike, I'm going to extend that out a little bit to the keepers out there as well, because I ordered the whole thing, right? We got the slipcase books, I got the starter set, I got the whole thing, and came in. And at first I saw the little, play by yourself scenario, and I'm like, I don't need that. I've played Call of Cthulhu. I was so happy I didn't, though. I'm so happy that I walked through it. So even if you're not a player, as a keeper, it's phenomenal, because it steps you all through. And what I found is it made it easier to move to the next step. It made it easier to read the next thing, or I didn't. Obviously, I just glanced at the next thing. I didn't read it, but no, it's presented in a wonderful way. Mike, I owe you a huge favor, my friend. This was fantastic, and I really appreciate you making the time.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Chatting, Craig. And I'm always happy to talk Cthulhu, as most people who know me know. So it's been an absolute delight. And I'm sorry if I have waffled unnecessarily in parts, and you get me
I'll
going,
edit
wind
it
me
all
up, and
out, Mike.
I'll just keep going. So, hopefully, when before civilization crashes and the old ones rise, maybe post pandemic, when life is back to normal, I'll be back over in the US at things like Gen Con, and
Wonderful.
and never know, we may meet in real life.
We might bump into each other.
And a tale to tell from there.
So, guys, for those of you listening, we're going to have links to everything here in the show notes for you to explore this out. And like I said and hinted at, if you're new to role-playing or have never played Call of Cthulhu before, go grab those free rules. I'll have them linked in the show notes. And just buy the starter set for me. And if you hate it, then it's my fault because I'm the one that told you to try it. I think that you'll really, really enjoy it. And for those of you who listened all the way to the end, I appreciate you doing that too. So take care. Hey, did you hear that? You leveled up. You finished another episode of Tabletop Talk from Third Floor Wars. If you want more from the third floor, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Head on over to our YouTube channel. It is packed with painting tutorials, gaming tips, battle reports, and role-playing actual plays. Did you enjoy this episode? Why don't you send a link to one of your friends so they can enjoy it too? Last but not least, write us a review on your podcatcher of choice. This helps us find listeners almost as cool as you. So what I'm thinking here, and this, I don't think this needs to be long, Mike, is I just kind of, one of the things when I talk to people about Call of Cthulhu is they don't quite know what to do with it sometimes. And it seems to be a common question that comes up, like, how do you do it? How do you make something that, you're going to lose? So how do we make this fun? And it's conversations I've had with people saying, well, we'll get into it. Anyway, that's the idea.
Yeah.
God, that's crazy, man. That it's very funny to consume something like that from very fresh eyes that I had, and then to hear. And this is why I love these interviews, is because I hear how the sausage was made, because I only took the end product in.
Oh, sure. It's like I don't remember what I was going to say now. It's like you don't really need to include it, but
God, it's a great story, Mike.
I do feel I'm rabbiting on a lot, so just shout at me if I'm...
That's my job, Mike. You're doing it's fantastic.
I'm just going to refill my cup.
Yep. No, if you were rambling, I would say something. I'd steer you back.
Oh, fine.
Mike did a lot before he came on to Chaosium, and Hey, are you still here? Look, the podcast is over, and you sat through all of the breaks and bloopers? Well, I mean, if you're here, you might as well run over to patreon.com and become a supporter. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast, too, while you're at it, on whatever platform you're listening to. I do appreciate you sticking around. Take care.